Monday through Thursday, we grow all the food and we harvest it Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday, we compost all of what we harvested all week long. And so that's a common theme I've seen is the idea that if you grow it, they will come is not a reality. Unfortunately, you need to sell your food and then grow it and set up your distribution network. So if I had any really just one piece of advice for anyone looking to get into this is know your market, know where your food's going, because we're working with a perishable.
Welcome to the Vertical Farming Podcast, weekly conversations with fascinating CEOs, founders, and AgTech visionaries. Join us every week as we dive deep into the world of vertical farming with your host, Harry Duran.
Vertical Farming Podcast Season 2, welcome back. If this is your first time listening, you are in the right place, as this is the show where we interview fascinating CEOs and founders of the leading vertical farming companies from around the world. I'm your host, Harry Duran. In case you missed last week's show, I had a great conversation with Season 2 sponsor, Ceres Greenhouse Solutions founder Mark Plinke. A really inspiring interview and conversation with Mark that's generating a lot of great feedback. Mark is the consummate inventor and passionate about all things supporting this industry, and it was really fun to hear his enthusiasm come through on that interview. So make sure you check that out. Special thanks to our episode sponsor, Ceres Greenhouse Solutions. If you're looking for a greenhouse solution that will suit your specific climate and growing goals, then talk to an expert from Ceres Greenhouse Solutions. Ceres combines passive solar concepts, innovative climate control technologies, and customized grow systems to ensure that their growers are yielding the highest quality product year-round for the lowest operational cost. Visit ceresgreenhousesolutions.com, that's spelled C-E-R-E-S, greenhousesolutions.com to learn more. This week, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kyle Barnett. He's the founder of Ponic Jobs and a co-host on the CropTalk Podcast. He's also serving as an account manager in the horticulture division at WestRock, focusing on helping growers create superior packaging, labels, and merchandising solutions, which is something that's top of mind for me anytime I have these conversations. In this episode, we discuss the varying facets of ponics, from deep water culture and NFTs to vertical farming and aquaponics. We talk about the vital role distribution plays in the AgTech industry and what inspired Kyle to create the Ponic Jobs well site, as well as his collaboration with CropTalk Media. His podcast segment, Kyle Talks AgTech, focuses on CEA, vertical farms, greenhouse technology, and other industry leaders. As a reminder, if you enjoyed this episode or past episodes, I'd love it if you leave a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. Let's get into this conversation with Kyle. So Kyle Barnett, co-host of the CropTalk Podcast, specifically the Kyle Talks AgTech feature, founder of PonicJobs.com, and also part of the WestRock team. Thank you so much for joining us on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Harry, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's a challenge to just put you into one role with these intros. And I think that's what's going to make this conversation so much more interesting, because all the different ways that you're interacting with the world of vertical farming, AgTech. And so it'll be a pretty wide-ranging discussion. So I'm excited and don't know where it's going to end up, but I think it's going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my background is eclectic within the industry, and that has really been my goal, is to just get as much experience in all the different dimensions of controlled ag as possible. So it's been quite the fun and exciting journey. It really has.
So can you talk a little bit about your personal journey, and we'll deep dive onto each of these as they come up. But when, if you could think back and trace back your interest in, controlled ag, where did that stem from?
Sure. So I've always had an interest in food, especially, and I went to the Culinary Institute of America, and I was on this journey to become a chef. And, when I really started seeing that I wanted to look more into farming, it was my senior year. And, I just started seeing how a lot of my influence to why I was cooking had to do with the farming and the growing of the crops. And, I did a final project where I kind of recreated a garden with a dish, and then we were choosing our final trip for the year. You get to go on this great trip to explore food with the culinary. You can go to Spain, you can go to France, you can go to Italy, and then you can go to California. And let me tell you, nobody wanted to go to California compared to these global trips, but it was my first pick. And it was because that was a very farming, agriculture, horticulture themed trip. And, it was more of the farm to table aspects. And so, when I went out there for 3 weeks, it really was kind of, as I graduate to become a chef, this epiphany of, oh man, well, this is where my heart is growing the food. It's so fascinating. So, it couldn't be an easy transition. I cooked for a while, was a sous chef, landed a fantastic job as a personal chef for a man named Dan Collin, who was a modern artist in New York City. And he had this farm art studio where I cooked. And when you reach that fantastic point where you're like, this is it, this is an amazing job, and I'm still not satisfied, that's when I really knew I had to go and explore what my calling seemingly was. So originally I was all packed up to go to a berry farm, actually, strawberry and blueberry farm. And I knew I wanted to go into controlled ag, especially because of the seasonality aspect of being able to have these great ingredients all throughout the year from a chef mindset was amazing. So I'm all packed up, ready to go on this apprenticeship. And someone I had been hassling and bothering, a local aquaponics facility, called me the week before I was supposed to leave to my apprenticeship and said, oh, we want to have you in. We want to talk to you. And I decided to go down, and I finally had this interview, and they said, you can start cleaning the greenhouse for us and hosting at farmers markets. And so I canceled the apprenticeship because I knew that's where my heart was. And I joined this aquaponics facility, which unfortunately wasn't really well put together. And it was my first learning exercise of really seeing how it can go wrong within the industry. So there was a lot of mistakes made, and it didn't go too well. They went bankrupt. They had a lot of funding, but it didn't end up well. So from there, I moved to an outdoor organic farm for a few months. And I had a friend from Continental Organics, this aquaponic place. I had a friend who joined Bright Farms, which was this one greenhouse at the time, just this up and coming grow facility. And I called him and said, hey, how can you get me in there? And he said, well, I can get you a day to work here and we can see, and he was, labor force. And so my girlfriend at the time, now wife, was going to college at Rider University. And I stayed with her for a day, and I worked 12-hour shifts, and they said, hey, we love you, but we have no openings. I said, okay, call me if anything comes up. And they called a week later and offered me, a apprenticeship sort of position, but it was really just a labor job. And anyone that works in more of these commercial grow facilities knows it kind of, labor is the key word. It's a lot of hard work. And, from there, I really tried to prove myself to the company. And, I started working on side projects of showcasing different ideas and things and ways we could improve, and just really tried to go above and beyond for the team. And and the key account manager position opened up as they started to expand to Washington, D.C., as they were building another greenhouse. So I took that position, and I started in the corporate circle from there. And for 2.5 years, I sold lettuce greens to grocery stores and different distribution channels and helped perfect the system. And I love Bright Farms, still have a great relationship. And another opportunity came up after, I would say, 3 years or so with Bright Farms for a company called Hort Americas. And they were looking to open up the Northeast to sales of substrates, fertilizers, LED lighting. And I took the position, and it was a very entrepreneurial open up this territory. And, it was great. It was a great experience. It really is where I gained a lot of perspective on all the different players in the field. I got to visit a whole ton of vertical farms. I've seen places, grow up. I've seen them crash and burn. I've helped solve their problems. And, I was able to sell a lot of LED lighting to some of the bigger growers now and help develop their full system. So Great experience. And just in July, I joined WestRock as account management towards horticulture and really trying to develop out sustainable packaging solutions for controlled ag or, conventional growers. And it's been great so far, really trying to uncover all these different packaging solutions we can find for, let's say these big hunks of plastic that are used in produce. So when I left Hort Americas and I told all my connections where I was going, that's the number one thing they said. They said, you got to find us, get rid of the plastic, get rid of the plastic. So during my time at Hort Americas as well, I joined CropTalk. A good friend of mine, Charlie McKenzie, was starting CropTalk Media, and he wanted to have a range of hosts, and I was the first host to come on. And my segment was Kyle Talks AgTech, and it's been great. I've had over 35 episodes now, and it's really given me a lot of clarity into, what the industry needs and some really great ideas. So, as I said in the beginning, it's been an eclectic journey, but I am so grateful for the whole process and everything that I've been able to, learn from it and been able to assist the industry as well.
That's a fantastic story, and a long ways from the Coloring Institute of America, which is in upstate New York. I grew up in Yonkers.
Oh, okay. So we were basically neighbors. I was in, LaGrangeville, Poughkeepsie area growing up. So
and I went to high school in White Plains, Old Boys Catholic High School there, Archbishop Stepanek. I live in Minneapolis now. So
oh, wow.
But I've just been here for about a year and a half, but I've lived in New York and in LA, and now I'm in the Midwest. So it's been interesting to see the differences in regions. But it's a funny story about Culinary Institute of America. I had never been, and I've always wanted to go. My parents love, going there, and they've had lunch there.
Oh, it's fun.
And the one time I was there visiting last year, they're like, let's go. And I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. We didn't bother to check if it was open, so we drove all the way there.
I've made the same mistake, and I've gone to the school. I really have. I brought my wife. I'm like, hey, we're going to go, and Sundays are off limits, and that's unheard of in the restaurant industry, but I've been there before.
It was closed. Yeah, so that's fun. So it's interesting, like, what was it that driving you that kept changing and kept having you pursue, like, first, with the work you were doing with Bright Farms and then Hort Americas, and even like this idea to work in like a controlled agriculture environment. If you had to describe what that pull was about, what was attracting you to work in those types of jobs?
Yeah, I think it was the chef at heart for two reasons, especially. One being that the seasonality was always this issue with, you get a tomato in December and you want it to be local. It's going to be from Mexico. You're going to cut it. It's going to be tasteless, white in the inside, no flavor. Yeah. So, when I started at Continental Organics, they had a tomato house up there, and the tomatoes were just out of this world in December. It was amazing, and really special flavor. And that's, the seasonality aspect. But, the second part of that was, how special the flavors were, not only of a tomato, but of all these microgreens and these different crops. When you and it's, yes, you can talk about it as controlled ag or just conventional farming. When you pull something out of the ground and immediately consume it, it's special. And so much of what we eat, we know like these basic flavors. But then when you start to try all these different microgreens and, oh man, this one tastes like wasabi, and this one tastes like a Sour Patch Kid, and this one tastes like a blend of Indian spices. It's so special. It's such an experience. And that's what, the foodie in me was always interested in, was the experience, and, enabling these chefs and these past friends that I've had to be able to, expand their, metaphorical palette of colors and be able to express themselves with the, the lemon balm basil and a whole new dimension. It was really special. So that was pulled me into the space was, seasonality first and flavor second.
And then as you started to, so that was that's really like the chef in you, and then understanding the importance of flavor. And then you move into seeing, the actual operations of these companies, and even the couple that you've mentioned that, tried and failed. Once you were on the inside, for people that don't have that opportunity to work in some of these companies, if you could place your finger on from what you've seen, some of these places succeed or why they don't? Like, what are they getting right, and where sort of are they going off the rails and not succeeding?
Yeah, there's all sorts of different metrics and, things that I can discuss. But the one that I hold dear to my heart, it also has to do with, my personal mission is, so I can go back to my initial experience at Continental Organics. And the issue was, and it's a terrible joke I make, is Monday through Thursday, or let's say, Monday through Thursday, we grow all the food and we harvest it Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday, we compost all of what we harvested all week long. And so that's a common theme I've seen is the idea that if you grow it, they will come is not a reality. Unfortunately, you need to sell your food and then grow it and set up your distribution network. So if I had any really just one piece of advice for anyone looking to get into this is know your market, know where your food's going, because we're working with a perishable. And, an old boss of mine came in and he said, "This place looks beautiful. Look at all the crops growing, everything. This is amazing." And everything was ready to harvest at the same time in like an NFT greenhouse. So that wasn't necessarily a good thing, because then we didn't have the hands to harvest it all, and we didn't have anywhere for it to go. So it ended up, I have a picture of a past friend of mine up to his neck in bibhead lettuce, that was in the compost bin. So, you have to really, the art of growing is one aspect of this, but distribution is a really big piece of the equation as well.
Yes, it reminds me of the conversation I had with Eddie Badrina. He's Eden Green, about this idea of product market fit. And, he comes from a marketing background, so he thinks about that from day one. And I think when he started working with the team there, that's where his mind works right away. And I think a lot of the people who get into it, for some of the reasons you've talked about, they have a passion for, fresh produce. And then you need to have the business skills as well and understanding marketing as well, and all the different pieces that make up a successful business. And I think a lot of people that are getting started don't think about that. But I don't know if you could speak to this, but do you feel like now there is more of an awareness that all the pieces need to be in place? Because I think what we saw with COVID is in fact examples of just how unstable this supply chain was, right? And you could have, the stories of these potatoes being buried and megaton, whatever the measurement was. But and this is all over the world, so it highlights the how not mature, unstable, whatever word you want to use, the supply chain was. Because what good's having all this produce that we're growing and not able to get it into the hands and mouths of the people that need it and want it.
Yeah, and it was unfortunate. I was still at Hort Americas when COVID originally hit. And, I unfortunately watched some of the maybe small to medium vertical farms that I was working with. They didn't survive because 100% of their business, let's say they're focused on microgreens, was restaurants. But what's funny about it is I also, on the flip side, saw some of the most amazing ingenuity by a lot of these growers. And I saw people prosper that you might not expect because they pivoted. And I think that's such an important thing to remember when growing and when owning any company, or if you have the entrepreneurial spirit, you have to be ready to pivot at the flip of a coin. And, what they did is restaurants are closed, but people are still eating and people still want to get these things, and maybe they're cooking more. So now all of a sudden they go from more of a restaurant way of doing things, a restaurant distribution, to all of a sudden they're residential and they're delivering their own local boxes. And I've seen some really great success stories through this. Just, I know Fresh Impact Farms in Washington, D.C., they seem to be doing great now, and Ryan was able to take this business and pivot it accordingly and make it work. And I think that if when tough times come with COVID and you just expect to be, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing and I hope that it gets better, then, not to be harsh, but maybe entrepreneurial, roles is not, maybe you shouldn't do that, or you should change and be more ready for that pivot. So, it's been really tough on our industry, but the whole thing with COVID is it's also shed a really nice spotlight on vertical farming as well, where now people are maybe a bit more concerned about food security or locality with ingredients or distribution. And now, I think that it's also kind of been the spark for the industry, which is exciting to see.
Yeah, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a
Yeah.
different result, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, and it's and as an entrepreneur myself, I can relate to this idea of really figuring out like, am I going to survive? What do I need to change, or what preconceived notions do I have about what I used to do that are completely out of the window? New industries have been created, new ways of doing business, people pivoting into something that ended up being long-term or just something that they had to do short-term just to survive. And I think it really kicks in this drive, a little bit of the survival of the fittest, but also just thinking like, I don't want to be out of business and I need to try something different, and being open to trying things that may or may not work. And I think that speaks to, that entrepreneurial mindset of just, the Wayne Gretzky analogy, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So
Yep. I have it on my wall over there, actually. It's a Michael Scott quote by Wayne Gretzky from The Office. So it's an inside joke. But yeah, no, I love that quote. And it's very true.
Can you talk a little bit about the work you did with the Farm Tech Society? I'm curious, I haven't heard about that organization, and I'm wondering if there's anything you learned about just bigger picture, how the industry works, or insights from there.
Sure. Yeah. So the Farm Tech Society is really trying to bridge together a lot of, just vertical farming and the industry. They're in the European market and they're focused on the US as well. But they're really trying to just define these systems in place, catalog things accordingly, organize the industry, because, right now there's a lot of moving pieces. And, I think the goal is to have a central hub, to be able to rely on things from, certain certifications to HR, to connections, to products, to all of these moving pieces. It's so scattered, unfortunately, but it's because the industry is in such infancy right now. So, the big goal being that we can kind of create this hub with a lot of different resources that will, help vertical farms and the like prosper.
And you're still with that organization? You're still consulting with them, advising?
Yeah, there's the Center of Excellence for Indoor Ag is another one it's in Philadelphia, and it's a way to learn right now and give back is just these advisory roles as they need any information, and it's fun. It's a fun industry to just kind of explore solutions collectively. So I really enjoy the work I'm doing with the advisory roles.
Do you think there's probably a whole slew of organizations, associations that are looking to improve, for the betterment of ag tech? And the other thing that's interesting is all the terminology, because there's controlled ag, there's indoor ag, there's ag tech, there's vertical farming. And I'm wondering, in your role as advisor, if you come across some of these interesting ways of like people trying to pigeonhole what it is that you're working on, and if there's any confusion sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, terminology can be tricky because everyone has their own language. And I've been corrected with things like, don't call it deep water culture, or don't call it NFT, or don't call it this. And I've given up personally. I think you understand what I'm saying, and that's the purpose of words. If you understand what I'm saying, and obviously there will be refinement over time, and that's important. I've separated, vertical farm, vertical stacked, indoors for the most part, indoor farm, non-vertical, single plane, greenhouse is a greenhouse, and I think words can be dangerous because they can overcomplicate, but at the same time, we need to pay attention so we're not watering ourselves down, and not becoming clear. Yeah. Yeah,
it's interesting. What's NFT?
A nutrient film technique.
Okay.
So it's like the Crop King or American hydroponic, long trays, and there's a very thin little hose at the end that dribbles in water. And then deep water culture is floating rafts. And imagine like an Olympic sized pool, and you have these styrofoam floating rafts. And, that's the bulk of my experience was with those two systems. But, there's all sorts of systems out there.
Aeroponic.
Yeah, and aeroponic just being that fine mist. And I like aeroponics. I'm always scared if like the security measures, and maybe they've improved that, but if your system shuts down for, an allotment of time, it's kind of like you have the most security with deep water culture, and then you have less security with NFT, and then you have even less security with aeroponics. So I've always joked that, well, maybe in an environment like space where, hey, if the power goes out, you're in way bigger trouble than your plants. So
Yeah.
aeroponics could be, really good. It consumes the least amount of water as well. So there's all these pros and cons to every system out there. Some have more cons than other, but
What seems to be a specific niche that's attracted your attention because you have the site you've created called PonicJobs.com, right? So I'm wondering, can we go down a little bit of a ponic rabbit hole, if you will,
Sure.
and describe some of the benefits and all the different systems? Because people just initially think of hydroponic and aeroponic, but I'm wondering if there's others that people may not be as aware of.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly, Ponic Jobs, it's a free recruitment. I've put it out there. I'm working on, transforming it to growerrecruit.com and maybe adding other industries into it. But for now, it's Ponic Jobs. And that was really created because of my challenges to get into the space. I mean, to even get that, before they called me at Continental Organics, I was hanging around their lobby. I filled out a couple resumes. I followed up and gave up, and it was one of those where I never don't ever quit, don't ever, give up. But at this point I was ready to give up. So I wanted to, when I was looking for jobs in controlled ag, I couldn't find any type of board. So I was like, hey, well, if you can't find it, create it. And that's really where that came. And, you can list your resume and there's active jobs on there. And I invite anyone to list any positions they have just to get that much more exposure for free on there for the time being. To go through hydroponics, yeah, I mean, it's the three systems that I know that we talked about, NFT, deep water culture, vertical farming, which can integrate, different ways of each of those systems in vertical farming. There's aquaponics, which I spoke about before, which is using fishery and using a lot of the fish waste to be the nutrient base for what you're growing. It's probably the biggest challenge. It's the hardest, I think, out of a lot of these different ponics, let's call them. It's challenging to grow fish and plants. It's perfecting two different systems.
It seems like a lot of moving parts there.
Yeah. And so I like aquaponics. I fell in love with it because of the idea of it and the closed loop, but it's a tough one. Very, very tough, unless you're growing microgreens and really not focused as much on the fish. And the fish are just about fuel. I've seen that being done in New York City successfully, but that's a challenge.
And then the other types?
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, aeroponics, aquaponics, hydroponics, I know there's all these different systems as well. You have, zip grow towers, you have tower gardens, and a lot of them, like technically, when you look at a lot of these are just kind of the NFT technology, just retrofitted in, it's that nutrient film. So it's a light film of water, more or less. So, it seems complicated, but it's not once you can break it down and see that kind of, there's these baseline systems, maybe, Dutch bucket system for more of the vine crops that, you can actually, use a perlite or a cocoa base, and then you really have the other systems I discussed, and they're kind of tear down from there into different ways of growing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think, as with every other industry, and you probably see this in the nature of the jobs at some point that get posted, they'll start to look for specifics. We need someone who has a specialty in aeroponics, or I'd never even heard the term Dutch bucket before. So that's always learning something new on this show. Yeah.
And it's a lot of the postings I see on the website. Unfortunately, the talent's not there yet. So the industry, if you have like a very experienced hydroponic grower, they're heavily sought after, and I know certain growers can fetch, $250,000 salary for, really running large facilities. And the talent's so spotty right now that's what I think the industry also needs so badly is training and development of this talent, because there's a high demand for it, is the bottom line. There's a high demand for experienced growers, but, I've listened to your other podcasts, Harry, and everyone touches on the retiring farmers, and, it's a real thing. So, I'm excited to see how we can train up and educate and refine out the future of master growers.
Yeah, it's interesting because not even just in vertical farming, because I hear, one of the jobs that's high in demand is data scientists, so, and this is related to what some of the bigger companies are doing in the vertical farming space, but also bigger picture, other industries. And I think there's, when you think about careers that kids in school aspire to, or they want to go, it's not as easy as the astronaut and the fireman and the policeman anymore.
Yeah.
and I don't think, and I think to your point, there's some value in educating, kids that, when they're young and in school, that there's a whole wealth of, range of possibilities available in terms of what you can do, and in line what you did in terms of following your passion, like you like food. And so that sort of started you down the chef path, but, nurturing that interest in kids at an early age, and by opening them up to like what is possible, you can follow your passion, you can do something related to having that hands-on connection with your food. And I think the more of that we have, I think the better.
Yeah. And I completely agree. I'm happy you bring up like the younger education. I didn't really have any knowledge of this until later in life. And, I see a lot of really great organizations are now really trying to get kids interested in controlled ag or growing in urban environments now, which is really special. And when I was at Bright Farms, my wife was, she was teaching a classroom, and she needed to bring in a guest speaker. It's kindergarten class. And she said, why don't you come in and talk about hydroponics? And it was a lot of fun because the kids were, I just remember being like, with hydroponics, and this is, 6 years ago or so now. So I come into the classroom in a suit that doesn't fit. And I got these big, poster boards of images that I took from Bright Farms. And, I said, oh, you can grow anywhere with hydroponics, and they're anywhere. And then they just start in Antarctica, on the moon, and like just getting so, oh man, you can grow food anywhere. And, kids are so excitable, and they were, and we did a little project where, cut a t-shirt and you put some grass seed on it and you watered it, and they see, cool. Wow, all it needed was the water so, it's important. It really is to get them when they're young, get them interested, because that's how we're going to, create the next working professionals in this industry.
Yeah, and it's so funny because when you think about it, you hear the stories of kids who, like, there could very well have been someone in that classroom who just like remembers that as a pivotal moment to say like, whoa, just like lights the spark and says,
absolutely.
I find this fascinating. I'm going to their natural curiosity, and sometimes feeding that curiosity at that right moment when they're like fertile minds are just open to possibilities, I think is really important. So I'm sure you had an impact that day.
I hope at least, maybe one kid will, look at it later on, and at the least it was fun. And, we just got to keep doing things like that, and setting up these classroom systems and whatnot.
So along the lines of educating people to the topic of vertical farming, how did you get connected with the folks at CropTalk? And were you listening to podcasts already? Were you an active listener? Like, what's the story behind there?
Yeah, so Charlie was actually a customer of mine at Hort Americas. Okay. So, we were selling a system, 30 megahertz sensors. So it was a way that you could, really get microclimate readings, airflow, humidity, all these different metrics via these tiny sensors. And he was starting to do some consulting for CropWalk, which is a great company I highly recommend if you're looking for integrated pest management consulting. And he was starting to do some, work, and he wanted to be able to do these readings remotely. And so, we worked on that. We looked at these things, grow racks that he was looking at that are just, mini vertical farm units, on like a grow cart. And we hit it off. It just sometimes when working with anyone in sales, I think it's really about trust and fostering a relationship. And if you can develop a friend out of it, power to you. So we continued to talk, and, one day he called me and was like, I was thinking, Kyle, like you know a lot about this industry. I want to expand out this segment, let's do it. And we immediately, started rocking and rolling, and, we didn't have my segment quite lined up. My first guest was a hemp grower the hemp mine and really knowledgeable, but I didn't necessarily have the same education on everything he was talking about. So hey, let's focus on what you're good at and what you know. And, Kyle Talks AgTech. It feels like such an ego-based name, now that I'm like, okay, it was just because it was like Talk Crops and Charlie Talks Crops and then Kyle Talks Crops and then it was Kyle Talks AgTech. And I almost wish I chose a name more like Vertical Farming Podcast like yourself. But and I was able to go after a lot of these people I've worked with at Horde Americas, selling them substrates, fertilizers, lighting, different tools, all these different tools. I was able to say, hey, I'm doing this podcast. I know what you're doing. It's really cool. Why don't you come on? And, it progressed from there. And once COVID hit, I was doing like 2 a week, just shooting them out, as a way to just make people keep their sanity, keep myself busy during a slow time. Yeah. And it's been a lot of fun, and what's cool, and I think you can probably say you've experienced this, is you start to see these connections with like, oh, wow, everyone seems to touch on this fact. Mm-hmm. Everyone talks about, hey, you need to get hands-on experience before you do this, or, hey, make sure to network within or educate yourself with all, it's all these different things you start to see connections with when I was trying to speak to CEA leaders. And so for me, it was so helpful to just see all these different connections of, at the end of the day, what's the bullet points? What's most important to succeeding in such a young industry?
Yeah, and you're learning along the way as well, because they all come in with their different perspectives, their different history, and their different takes on the industry. And I've said this a couple of times on the show. It's almost I'm learning along with the listener as well. So I have this natural curiosity, natural interest in the topic, and bringing on a wide range of voices is really important for me and people that are covering it from different angles, because I always say you could have 5 people doing the same topic. 5 people covering vertical farming, 5 different hosts. After about, 3 months, 6 months, you'll have 5 different shows because it's just like really everyone is just their own personal lived experiences, and their specific interests will take them down different rabbit holes. And so you end up, and which I think is all great too.
Absolutely. And I know some of the other hosts have done kind of these crop debates where it's like 2 separate opinions and bringing them together. One was about bees, I believe, by Robert, and he did one about bees and is bee farming good for the environment or bad? And you kind of and he did that well. And I was like, man, I think about doing that with vertical farming, but some of the opinions are so strong. I'm like, I don't know if I'll be able to be a good mediator with, there's a lot of passion in the industry, and it's true. You get kind of 2 sides a lot of times, and people are impassioned in this space, which is, I think it makes it a lot more fun, is the level of passion here.
What's interesting about having this discussion with you, because this is the first time I'm having someone who's not directly like a founder or a CEO of a vertical farming company, but with all the different roles you've had in the industry, I was really excited to have this conversation. But the other thing is, and the listener may not be aware of, but I started this show because I own a podcast production company. It's called Fullcast, and we produce shows for clients. But I also am the host of another show called Podcast Junkies that I started in 2014. It's a bit meta. It's a podcast where I interview other podcasters.
So, I'll have to come on that one after this.
So that's the Seinfeld, the Kramer coffee table book about coffee tables. I always use that example. But it's been fascinating because I always am interested in the topic of podcasting. So now it's like all these, like the Venn diagram of the worlds converging on this episode is really interesting. So I'm curious, was podcasting hosting new to you, and what have you learned, and how have you improved as a host?
That's such a great question, because I've learned a lot. I think I talked too much originally, I can admit it, I can be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I think I talked too much when I started, and I've got better at letting the host really take the reins and not needing to insert my knowledge or what I know or this or that. And hey, this is, I guess if I was going to give any advice to someone starting a podcast, is remember who your podcast is about. And it's not about you. It's about your guests. And it's about shedding the spotlight on that guest and, really making it all about them, and obviously you want to have a conversation and you want to, say, hey, I experienced something similar. The back and forth is very important to, a natural podcast episode, but you got to let them speak. I don't think challenging anyone necessarily, making them uncomfortable. I mean, that's not what it's about. You can talk about opinions with specific guests and each of these different, areas, but you shouldn't necessarily like make someone look bad or something like that. So, and obviously all the production issues, the echoes, the knowing, not to have the cat scratching at the door or the wife vacuuming or anything like that, keep it quiet.
What's funny is, because of COVID, it's been the great equalizer, and some of the best conversations I've had recently on the show have been with CEOs and founders who, for lack of a better, situation, everyone's at home. And so it's just shows that we're all human, and, you can tell that some of these folks are like in their kitchen or in their kid's bedroom or something, and looking for a quiet environment, and it humanizes everyone. And I think, especially when, people think if you're talking to like the CEO of a, multi-billion-dollar company, that they think differently, but I think they experience some of the same, challenges that we all do. And I think what's been reassuring is they all have their heart in the right place of wanting to see this industry grow, get more visibility, and there's no shortage of money coming into the industry, as we've all seen as well. So I think I feel like it's that rising tide lifts all boats metaphor.
Yeah. And even the CEOs have the dog that barks in the background or the kid that runs into the room. Yeah. Yeah.
What's been things you've learned as a result of having these discussions, because you start to bring in these different viewpoints, and what are you learning about the industry that has you excited?
Yeah, you definitely learn how young it is, but how much potential it has. And, it's fun to have on grounded people, and it's fun to have on dreamers. And I think I'm reminded often with guests to don't limit anything. In the 60s, the cell phone that we have nowadays would have been outrageous. That's just, stop thinking like that, or, you can even say the 80s, 40 years ago, 1981, that was, nobody would have, you're out of your mind with how things are done. So you can't, if you're going to predict the future, it shouldn't be a limited prediction. And that's something I'm reminded of when I speak to a younger audience. And also, I think that one of the biggest lessons is we have to continually try to work together in this industry and not silo ourselves off. It's a constant theme that I hear from lots of guests on how, especially in the North American market, we're siloing ourselves and potentially making the same mistakes. Of course, you have to understand why that's being done, and there's, you're protecting your assets and all of this, but, it's still, we need to communicate as best we can. I know in the Netherlands, the Dutch are much better at critiquing and and communicating about, improving the overall system. So, I think there's a lot we can learn from how other established markets, at least from a growing side, are doing it.
Have you been able were you able prior to the pandemic to make it to some of these conferences and events?
I tried so hard to get to Green Tech, the big one overseas. And I was potentially going to go the year that everything happened, but yeah, it fortunately didn't happen. I wish I could show you, I have this box of tags from all the conferences that I've gone to. I loved conferences, Indoor AgCon, Cultivate, Mance, from the old fashioned to the new age, these Brooklyn AgTech summits. I really tried to, attend, as many as I could, a couple a month if I could, before COVID. So it's really been a transition. I did a trade show this week. I'm putting quotes in the air, and it's different, to do these big conferences, and now it's a lister and maybe you have a video. It's
not the same.
It's not the same. I don't think it's as beneficial, but I think we're continually as an industry going to find ways to keep the ball rolling, to keep the communication up, the networking moving. I'm waiting for the VR glasses that
yeah.
will let me go into a virtual trade show where I actually can virtually see other people. But I think we're a little bit ways off from that one.
It's so funny because you mentioned that one thing I do miss is playing poker with my buddies, and especially the ones back in New York. And I've been looking into the Oculus VR goggles, and the company PokerStars actually has a virtual reality game.
Oh, that's cool.
So that would be interesting. And all these industries are going to have, I think they've just mentioned that the 360-degree virtual treadmill is now functioning. So you have the goggles on and you could move in 360 degrees. And so
I'm a big fan. I have like the PS VR, which is in a box right now. I haven't had the time to hook it all up, and it's like a roller coaster ride. I have to take a motion sickness pill before I get in that thing.
Yeah.
But I think the whole VR experience could potentially, it's going to affect, in my opinion, all industries, especially through something like this in good time. But I think from, vertical farming, even, it would be great to put on a headset and go in the treadmill and walk through someone's greenhouse when they're doing the same thing, however, but, I think a little bit of ways away, but I would love to be able to find some way to do something a bit more, with a little bit more virtual substance.
Immersive experiences.
Yeah, there you go.
So I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the work you're doing, or that WestRock is doing, for those that may not be aware what the company is and what they specialize in.
Sure. So, WestRock is especially focused right now on sustainable packaging solutions. And we're really trying to develop unique, creative, empowering solutions for every aspect of every industry. My particular division is MPS horticulture. And, we sell a lot of the labels and tags and things like that to all the big floriculture growers. And what I'm excited to start to uncover is solutions for produce growers. As I said early on, like when I spoke and told the friends and connections I had where I'm going, they said, "Oh, you got to get us a solution to this plastic clamshell." And it's everyone in our industry, or a good percentage, are so focused on sustainability and care for the world and really trying to do the right thing. And then we're loading our leafy greens or our tomatoes into these plastic tubs. Yeah. So if we can find a more recyclable, system, something that is, biodegradable within 18 months or breaks down much easier, it's such a win. So, I joined WestRock to really gain that experience and hopefully be able to assist in developing these type of solutions, because, a grower might cost them a nickel to grow a head of lettuce, but their clamshell might cost 25 cents. So a big portion of what they're paying goes into the packaging. And so ideally we want that to be a really sustainable, long-term mindset of the health of the industry and the planet and everything. So, I'm really proud to be a part of WestRock. They are extremely socially conscious and really focused. If I had a word for their attitude towards the future, it's sustainability. They're looking for, really as many alternatives to plastic in every industry you can imagine as possible, and finding these really, more caring approaches. So it's great.
Yeah, I think that's what was interesting for me as I was learning more about this industry, is the dichotomy between like people who obviously care about the importance of the environment and having this connection with the food and local access to food, and which then sort of flies in the face of like what, by virtue of doing that and getting all this food to people, that need it, you are contributing to the problem of more plastic in the environment. And it's something that I've always thought about. And it's so great to see WestRock having this as a focus, because it feels like if you can crack that nut and come up with some options, and they may not be like, helpful from a price perspective early on, but as with all technologies and all things, like the first versions are not the ones where we're going to end up at. But I think, having some of these bigger farms look at that as something that's important for them is going to be key.
Yeah. And really, when I look at my goal of developing out these maybe more, non-plastic clamshells, or, all these styrofoam replacements, for mushrooms or whatever it is, the new market, the new consumer that's really starting to gain the buying power, the millennial audience, they're very focused on
Yeah.
this, responsible purchasing power that they have. And
Mhm.
they don't want to buy the plastic tub. They don't want
Yeah.
to have to throw that into a landfill. They want to. And I know when I shop, I'm willing to pay a little bit more. And so, I think that, yeah, maybe initially these things might not be quite as affordable as the established market, but at the end of the day, they're going to set you apart from your competition as someone that's more socially aware, planet conscious, and they're going to be a solution that, you can feel good about at the end of the day. And I think that comes from growers, as you said too. Not only is it the end user is going to feel good, the grower is going to feel better about, what their inputs and what they're putting out into the marketplace.
Yeah, totally agree. A couple of questions as we wrap up. What's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently or ask recently?
Gosh, oh man, a tough question I had to ask myself. I would say, how much do I miss hands-on? Sometimes I miss hands-on, and the tough question is, I'm behind a computer all day. That's a tough question. Sometimes I ask myself, if like, man, I'm behind a computer. Is this where I'm supposed to be? But at the end of the day, you reflect back and you say, well, I'm assisting the people and I'm helping the industry, and I'm doing a lot from this terminal. And I can feel good about that at the end of the day. So, the chef in me with the knife, or the farmer, in the greenhouse, sometimes misses that. And that's the tough question of like, man, should I be doing that? Should I be more hands-on? But I think at the end of the day, I'm saying, hey, I'm helping those people. I'm assisting the industry. I'm developing really great content. And, I feel good about that at the end of the day. So that's my little, back and forth I play with myself. I need to get a greenhouse in my backyard someday to get that out of the system.
Well, I'll give a shout out and a plug to our episode sponsor series, Greenhouse Solutions. They're creating, they've got the commercial size, but they're also creating smaller versions that people can just place in their own backyards. And they're more of a hybrid model that are a little bit more advanced than a standard greenhouse. So actually, I just finished an interview with Mark Plinke, the founder, and he talks about the differences and what they're doing. So I'll make sure I'll let you know when that episode goes live as well.
I've met with the group at trade shows in the past. It's a great group, great company.
Yeah, it's so interesting, this hands-on. And I mean, I had always had dreams of being a chef as well. I never pursued it. And so when you told me you had gone to CIA, I was like, oh man, and even now I'm like, I remember looking last year, I'm like, how old is too old to study to be a chef?
That's never too old. That's my attitude. But if you go to that school, be ready for a handful of Gordon Ramsays. I'll say that much.
I'm sure.
It's intense.
So but I think I get my fill by watching Chef's Table on Netflix.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And my wife's not a foodie, which everyone's like, I can't believe that. But and I'm making her slowly into a foodie, incorporating ingredients. I've improved, but she'll watch those shows with me and we have a lot of fun. So I'm at least happy about that. And then it's like a challenge. Like, can I make something exotic that she'll enjoy? So I can always refine the tools that way.
I'm always looking for opportunities for the listener to get to know the guests a little bit more. So is there a little known fact about you that most people don't know about?
I would say I probably talk too much about my culinary background. So, gosh, I'm originally from New York. It's all boring stuff. I'm probably too transparent is my issue, Harry, as I tell everyone my life story when I meet them.
That's good.
Yeah, it's good and it's bad. Some people like it more than others.
What's interesting, Kyle, is I think that's how people relate and they find a point of reference which to connect with you. And I think that's what I've been trying to do on the show, is just like let people know there's different ways that people can make their way into the vertical farming industry. And I love to hear your story because I've heard a lot of really good ones. And I think it was Andrew Carter, and hopefully I've got it right, who told me the story of
Smallhold.
Yeah, Smallhold. Was he the one who had the cello and he played it, and it was for a wedding, and they asked him if he could play Daft Punk on the cello, and he's like, that's silly, I'm not going to do that. And a friend's like, of course you're going to do it, just give him a ridiculous price. And he quoted them like $3,000 or something like that, and the people said yes. And,
oh man!
And so he got the money, and with that he bought his first container farm. And so that like
That's funny.
And I'll have to look into that and follow up if I've got the right person. But I've had the interviews start to blur with each other.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just one of those examples of just like there's no right way to find your way into this industry. So I'm glad I was able to hear your story and share that as well.
Yeah. And if you want to get in the industry, I mean, I'd say, be prepared to get your hands dirty and maybe do some unfun work for a little while. And you got to make it fun. You learn. But I know, these long NFT trays, scrubbing them with bleach, and it wasn't fun.
Yeah.
But, I did it with a smile, and, I slowly worked my way up to managing that greenhouse. And,
That's great.
I think if you show dedication and you really just hold true, it'll come, and you just got to be patient as well. But yeah, I invite anyone to give it a shot and come into the industry. We need you.
So there's a couple different projects you're working on that we mentioned. So as we wrap up, what's the best way for folks to stay engaged with you if they want to follow up or just follow what you're doing?
Sure. Connect with me on LinkedIn, I think is the number one way, because then we can really go down whatever rabbit hole you want, whether it's, Ponic Jobs, Grow a Recruit, or you want to talk about packaging solutions via WestRock, or, advisory roles, or heck, you just want some advice. I talk too much and I like talking to people. I love talking about this industry, and it's really, I pay it forward mentality. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I believe the backslash is Barnett KY, but just search Kyle Barnett.
Yeah, we'll have those. Yeah, I've got the link, and we'll make sure all those links are in the show notes.
Yeah.
All the links you provided as well. And for the benefit of the listener, like that's exactly how you and I connected, and we just started a conversation. And, I've had some really great intros coming from LinkedIn. It's a platform that I'm really active in on a daily basis. So and so we'll make sure that people can reach you that way.
Yeah. Now I'm happy we connected. I saw your podcast. I was like, this guy's doing so much better than me. What the heck? I got to connect with him now.
Well, really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks again for taking the time to come on. All right. Thanks so much, Harry. Thanks again to Kyle for providing such a lively discussion. It's a little different because normally we have a founder or a CEO on the show. And Kyle has a wide range of interests, and I think that's what made the conversation all that much more interesting and engaging. So I really appreciate him sharing his story and giving us some new insights into the world of vertical farming. Special thanks to our episode sponsor, Ceres Greenhouse Solutions. Ceres is creating sustainable growing environments by combining smart design, innovative technology, and dynamic partnerships. Learn more at ceresgs.com. That's CERESGS.com. If you enjoyed this episode or past episodes, I'd love it if you leave a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. We'll be sure to read them out on future episodes. Until we meet again next week, here's to your health.
Thanks for listening. To read the full show notes for this episode, which includes any links mentioned in the episode, as well as a full show transcription, visit verticalfarmingpodcast.com. There, you can sign up for our email list to be notified when new episodes are published.